Hello everyone, I am Katrina Angela Agol and today we are going to tackle the Unit 5 Feedbacking Communicating Assessment Results, the Lesson 2. And Miss Duna Metigoy, she will be the one to discuss the constructive feedbacking, and Miss Gillian Gumisic, she will also be the one to discuss the principles of constructive feedback. And me, I will also be the one to discuss the different characteristics of constructive feedback. So my assigned topic is the characteristic of constructive feedback. So what are the different characteristics of constructive feedback? So the different characteristics of constructive feedback are: number 1, it is descriptive rather than evaluative. Second, it is specific rather than general. Third, it is focused on the behavior rather than on the person. Fourth, it takes into account the needs of both the receiver and the giver of feedback. And fifth, it is directed towards behavior which the receiver can do something about. Sixth, it is solicited rather than imposed. Seven, it is well timed. Eight, it involves sharing of information rather than giving advice. And ninth, it involves the amount of information the receiver can use rather than amount we could like to give. And the lastly is it concerns what is said and done, or how, not why. So now we are going to expound each characteristic of constructive feedback. So the first characteristic of constructive feedback is it is descriptive rather than evaluative. By describing one's own reactions, it leaves the individual free to use it or not to use it as they see fit. By avoiding evaluative language, it reduces the need for the individual to respond defensively. So descriptive feedback, it is a specific information in the form of written communication or conversation that help the learners understand what he or she needs to do in order to improve. Rather than evaluative feedback, it is a summary for the students or the learners, or how well he or she has performed on a particular task. So the second characteristic of constructive feedback is it is specific rather than general. So to be told that one is dominating will probably not be as useful as to be told that in the conversation that just took place, you did not appear to be listening to what others were saying and felt forced to accept your argument. The third characteristic of constructive feedback is focused on the behavior rather than on the person. So it is important that we refer to what a person does rather than to who we think or imagine they are. Thus, we might say that a person talked more than anyone else in this meeting rather than that they are a loudmouth. The former allows for the possibility of change. The latter implies a fixed personality trait. So behavior focus rather than personality focus. So feedback that refers to what the student does allows scope for change. We might comment, "You appeared to lose focus and direction when interviewing Mr. J," rather than commenting, "You are too vague" during client interviews. And the fourth characteristic of constructive feedback, it takes into account the needs of both the receiver and the giver of feedback. Feedback can be destructive when it serves only our own needs and fails to consider the needs of the person on the receiving end. It should be given to help, not to hurt. We too often give feedback because it makes us feel better or give us a psychological advantage. So, positive and encouraging. Balancing comment on strength you have observed and what the students did well with areas of weaknesses or that require further growth. Encouraging improvement with practical and specific suggestions. And the fifth characteristic of constructive feedback, it is directed toward behavior which the receiver can do something about. Frustration is only increased when a person is reminded of some shortcoming over which they have no control. So, by respectful, demonstrating mindfulness of acceptable boundaries, respecting confidentiality, and using language that is non-judgmental and provided in a relaxed, mutually agreed upon setting. And the sixth characteristic of constructive feedback, it is solicited rather than imposed. So feedback is most useful when the receiver has formulated the kind of questions which those observing can answer, or when they actively seek feedback. And the seventh characteristic of constructive feedback, it is well-timed. So in general, feedback is most useful at the earliest opportunity after the given behavior. The reception and use of feedback involves many possible emotional reactions. Excellent feedback presented at an inappropriate time may do more harm than good. So well-timed and expected, given as soon as is appropriate, or during or after the action or behavior, with consideration to client safety, privacy, time available for discussion, and the student's readiness to hear it. To prevent further problems or embarrassment arising, avoid waiting until halfway assessment or supervision session to provide the feedback. If client-student or staff-student relationships are at risk of being negatively affected. In the eighth characteristic of constructive feedback, it involves sharing of information rather than giving advice. So by sharing information, we leave a person free to decide for themselves in accordance with their own goals and needs. When we give advice, we tell them what to do and to some degree take away their freedom to decide for themselves. So it is also called as collaborative, inviting student involvement and agreement in identifying strengths and weaknesses in seeking solutions. So reaching conclusions and formulating plans for future actions, facilitating self-evaluation. So in the ninth characteristic of constructive feedback, it involves the amount of information the receiver can use rather than the amount we would like to give. So, to overload a person with feedback is to reduce the possibility that they may be able to use what they receive effectively. When we give more than can be used, we are more often than not satisfying some need of our own rather than helping the other person. So on the last characteristic of constructive feedback, it concerns what is said and done or how, not why. So the why, it takes us from the observable to find inferred and involves assumptions regarding motive or intent. So telling a person what their motivations or intentions are more often than not tends to result in a defensive response. So that are the characteristics of constructive feedback, and that's the end of my report. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, clarifications, you are free to ask. Thank you for your listening, and God bless us all.